they identify noble enterprises and they invite other people to participate in those noble enterprises that change the world, that make the world better, and that add meaning to the lives of the people who come on board with that leader and try to make it happen, as Cleopatra would say. And so, in a way, you might think of leaders who point out and articulate the grand purposes that they see in life, and bringing constituents together, bringing them on board to engage in these enterprises, and at the same time bring meaning into their own lives. Because most of us, by a certain age, have been doing whatever we've been doing and adding new things, and we're good at it, and we have our own repertoire of things. But then there are projects and enterprises that transcend us, that transcend our families or our friends, that are things that really need to be done in the world. What about poverty? What about hunger? What about, and for me, because I've been studying leadership for a while and been concerned about the question, leadership for what? And I'll tell you why I've become concerned about that, because as I teach leadership courses, many of our graduate students come into the leadership courses and they have engaged in leadership development programs in undergraduate schools, and most of those programs are by selection. You have to be selected into that program, so they feel, oh, well, I've been selected and I've been through the program, and they come and sit down in the front row in the Drucker School, and their attitude is essentially, well, show me where the group is that I'm leading. Like they're entitled. They feel they've been anointed as leaders, and now all you have, your function is to show them where the group is that they're supposed to lead. And I begin to say to myself, it's not about you. It's about the world. It's about what you can do for the world, not what the world, offers you as a podium for your own aggrandizement. So I think that we all, from the time we're very little, from the time we're Katie's age, and that's my only regret about this seminar, that Katie just wasn't prepared for the lecture that we had asked her to give. See, there are limits to entrusting, okay? But that human development in each and every one of us is an unending process. It goes on, and there are many lessons to be learned and developmental steps that each and every one of us has to take. And one of the things that leaders do is help us transcend ourselves, get beyond our concern about our own development, and liberate us, set us free in a way, to do the things that really matter in the world. And this really goes back to our existential concerns about what our legacy is. What is it going to mean when we're gone, that we actually were on this earth for X number of years? Did we make a difference? Did we change anything? Did we do anything that enhanced the world? And I think most of us would not like to look back from wherever, above or below, and see our tombstone that reads, here lies Jean Lipman-Blumen, who never did anything for anybody else except herself and her children. I would not like that on my tombstone, and I think most of us wouldn't. But authenticity is something that Connective leaders focus upon. Authenticity, remember, I define somewhat differently, is that commitment to the goals of the group or the society or the community rather than your own personal goals. So that enables us, in a way, it sets us free by committing ourselves. It's sort of paradoxical, but by modeling authenticity as leaders ourselves, we send others on a search for what's central, what's really bedrock within themselves, so that we look to that part of ourselves that's core and say, it's on that I want to build some kind of a process or an effort that helps the world, that changes the world in some way. And I think I have focused many times in the book and in the seminar on the existential anxiety that we all feel, whether we are aware of it or not, the recognition that we're all finite, that we're physical beings, and that at some point we are going to go, pass on. But what is it, if we think about that all the time, that's very unnerving. If Christina or I were to think about that, or Nola, we would drive back and forth on the 210 freeway every day. That, you can't be thinking about your existential anxiety when you're driving on the 210. You have to have thoughts that pull you away from that. So when we are absorbed in a larger mission, a larger vision of life, we forget about that. And that sets us free, because otherwise you can be very crippled by thinking about what's going to happen and how, soon I won't be here. And so I do think that the central focus or the central charge for leaders, the central duty they have, is to identify important and noble enterprises or purposes or causes or movements that enable us to ennoble ourselves. I know the Queen of England thinks that she is the one who ennobles people by taking the sword and touching them on the shoulder and says, "Rise, you are now a knight," or "You are now a lady." But that is simply not so. She is totally delusional. we are the only people who can ennoble us are ourselves. And we do that by making certain choices. And every time we have an opportunity to make a choice about what we will do with our lives, how we will represent ourselves to the world and to ourselves, every time we have that opportunity, that is the moment we either choose to ennoble ourselves or not to do so. So I think leaders can challenge us to act from that very noblest core that exists in each and every one of us. It's a matter of whether we listen to that voice or we listen to other parts of our other voices that don't necessarily really come from us, but come from the society, that talk to you about more money or more status or more whatever. And I think when we forget about those things and just really commit ourselves to noble purposes, those things take care of themselves, either because they happen or because you no longer care about them. Maybe you make a $1 jillion doing something noble, but maybe you won't, and you won't care either, because the cause itself becomes so important to you. And in a certain way, this enables us symbolically to forget about and transcend our mortality. So we realize we'll all die. I mean, that's an inevitability. But what will be left behind symbolically? What is it? What's the residue? What's the legacy that we want to leave behind? And so I have been asking for the last several years, as some of you know, about leadership for what? And my answer is for the most noble cause of all, because without this, I was trying to think, what is it that we need more than anything else in the world in order for us to flourish at every level? And it seems to me that the noblest cause is peace, because, as some of you know, I've done a fair amount of work on the research on looking at the expenditures in human life as well as in dollars, whichever way you want to count them, on war, on non-peace, on not paying attention to the environment. So here are some, you have this set of slides, and you'll see that there's wisdom from the ages about peace. And there, there are quotations here from Confucius, the Buddha, Isaiah, and Mary Parker Follett actually comes in here, Jesus, and Václav Havel. But the one that strikes me, and they have something in common. And when you read them, you'll see they all talk about how peace is the central issue. But look at the last part of the quote from Isaiah, and I think we all know this quote about beating swords into plowshares. But the part that I think many of us don't pay much attention to is a word in the last part of the sentence. Neither shall they learn war anymore. The word learn. Not neither shall they be engaged in war, but neither shall they learn war anymore. Because the wisdom there is we're not born wanting to go to war, but we have to learn that. We have to learn that the other is bad. At any rate, so I am concerned about global, enduring, and sustainable peace. And I've been thinking about this for quite a while, but I couldn't see how to implement this in any realistic way. How are you going to start a movement for peace? And there have been peace organizations all over the place for years. But I noticed they haven't succeeded. We still have wars everywhere. And so I began to think about this, and it felt for a while a certain amount of despair and helplessness until the Arab Spring came along. And then that showed me something. It showed me that we could use technology, we could use social media to make whole generations and countries, populations, aware of serious issues, and to bring people out into the streets to protest bad leadership. And why not have people protesting killing and war? Because we all suffer from it. So I tried to put together a peace plan, and I don't know if did we attach the whole peace plan?
Do you have the peace plan on your flash drive?
Yes, no?
Should be in which...
Whether you do or not, if you don't have it, we'll send it to you.
I don't think we did.
Okay, don't worry about it.
You're going to send it.
Yes, we will definitely send it.
And one of the things that got me energized about this and I've been thinking about it, but what forced me to put my thoughts down on paper was the fact that I was invited to, when 2008, after the worldwide economic situation that began in 2008, everybody became all, concerned about how are we going to change things. And I received an invitation from Nanjing University in China to talk to a multinational business conference on what business could do to address the 2008 meltdown. And as I thought about it, I thought, that's the wrong question, It's not what business can do. Business can do a lot. Can't do it all by itself. Business is not, despite the fact that I teach at a school of management, that isn't the whole world. We have to understand the world from a much more complex perspective. And I began to think about, oddly enough, age has its advantages. I remember John F. Kennedy talking about going to the moon, and people thinking he'd lost it, that this was the craziest idea. Why would anybody want to do it? What a waste of time and money and energy and effort. And as looking back on it, one of the things that happened was he turned the economy of the United States around just like that, because people began to do R&D and innovation and all kinds of things were going to the moon. And even today, all these many years later, there are breakfast cereals that were developed during that time that could be eaten on the plane. Yes.
Just
on
to
the shuttle.
bring it up, at the same time was a second big program run, this was the Polaris program, to put nuclear missiles on ships and on submarines. These
Yes,
were the two big programs by that time, in the 60s.
yes, and I think that that always happens. You know, Jung would have a lot to say about that, about the shadow side, that we have the positive side and we have the shadow side. But I began to think about, what if peace were the engine, the new economic engine, driving not just the United States, because this was a multinational conference, but every country. If every country said, okay, we're going to focus on peace, and we're going to put resources into peace entrepreneurship and peace innovation and peace R&D and money for a green economy that takes seriously climate change. You know, the report on climate change is just coming out this week, and it will show what we already know, that this year was the warmest year not only in the United States but worldwide over the period of recorded climate recording. So I think that we have to think about, how do we change things in a way that makes this world a world in which we don't kill off the next generation. That's called infanticide. We all think that's pretty bad, but when we're killing off other people's children, we don't look at it that way. So there are a number of things that I've been concerned about. I looked at the defense industry. It's the second largest industry worldwide, and the U.S. makes more than its contribution, but it's a worldwide industry. And it is entrenched, and it is more powerful than the military, because the military often is saying, we don't need those weapons, those are outdated, we don't want those. And the political system, which works hand in hand with lobbyists, convinces the Congress that they have to keep making those weapons because that creates employment in their hometown. So you'll see that there are a number of things that I've thought of that might be just a tiny bit controversial, that might address some of these issues. And what I've tried to do, and this is a work in progress, so when I send it out, I say this is a work in progress. If you have time and or interest to critique, to add, please do. Okay, so there have to be new initiatives for every sector of society, from government to museums and foundations, for schools, for unions, for the media. Now, some of the government ones I particularly like, because I think most governments will hate them, okay? First of all, there are right now 4 nations in the world that have a Department of Peace. Costa Rica is one of them. I don't know I keep forgetting what the other 3 are. But Benjamin Rush, who was one of the signers of the Constitution, if you go on the web, and I only discovered this after I came up with this idea, because I thought there's no new idea under the sun. Somebody must have thought of a Department of Peace before I did, so I put that in. And sure enough, there's an essay called A Department for Peace. And he even describes the room, how the room in which peace agreements will be signed, how it should be decorated. And I thought, what if you took, what would happen, for example, if at 4 o'clock Greenwich time on a Friday afternoon, worldwide, all the nations that are represented, as widely as possible in the UN and beyond, agreed that the defense departments, the departments of defense, and the defense, let me rephrase that, that the defense industry would become non-profit worldwide. Think about that just for a minute. What would that mean? If people who are in the defense industry knew that now they weren't going to get millions of dollars of profit because they were for-profit organizations, but would have to operate at the non-profit rate, but that half or more of the budget from the Department of Defense would go to a new Department of Peace, and there would be for-profit contracts for peace innovation, for peace R&D, for sustainability. So instead of making missiles or drones to kill people without anybody in the drone. That instead they would do things that would have a more peaceful means. And one time, about a year, it's now 2 years ago, when I was in Sweden, I turned on the TV because I was jet lagged and it was the middle of the night and I couldn't sleep because of jet lag. And there was a man talking about the fact that he used to make landmines. That was his business. And now he had converted to making landmine detectors. So now he was in the business of getting rid of those landmines so that they wouldn't kill people. He was making plenty of money, and he felt better about himself. And when he talked about, how he felt now that he changed, it was you could see a transformation come over this person. And I thought, we really need to rethink the military and think about letting the military do what it does best. The military is very good at R&D. The internet came about through the military, in all truth, an organization called DARPA, which connected all kinds of major computers all over the world and all over the U.S. And if you thought about how the military could focus on R&D, which they are really good at, if you would reduce the military in every country to essentially militia proportions. Remember, this has to be done worldwide simultaneously. You can't have one country doing this because it would make itself so vulnerable. It has to be a global agreement. That, for example, Costa Rica has no standing army. When the U.S. came into being, the founding fathers were terrified of standing armies. We only had a militia, and all of this discussion that you hear about the Second Amendment,
Yeah, it's a militia.
go back and read what the Second Amendment says. I can't believe the way people are talking about it. They talk about it as if we have said in the Second Amendment that every citizen has the right to bear arms. It does not say that. A militia was made up of people, men, who had ordinary jobs, regular jobs. They weren't an army, they weren't a military force, but when the country was attacked, they would regroup as a militia, as a military force. And that's the only time they'd come together that way, and they had the right to bear arms. It does not say we all have the right to bear arms, but somehow they keep talking about the Second Amendment.
There's a reason for that. There's a comma in that. A comma can make a huge difference. And in one version, which was later communicated, I think by Jefferson, the comma was forgotten, or in the copying process, it was just dropped. Yeah? So, and without the comma, you can read that they have the right to bear arms. With the comma, this is just an inclusion in a sentence, and the sentence outside says you have the right for a militia.
Well,
There was a U.S. Supreme Court.
I was just going to say that just about a year ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but the U.S. Supreme Court, which is really quite conservative at this point, interpreted that to mean that everybody has the right to bear arms. But setting that aside for the moment, if we thought about all countries contributing to an international peacekeeping force, so that when war started to break out someplace, that force would step in and say, whoa, we don't do that anymore. That used to be, that was, in stage 2, but we're in stage 3. The whole world is against this. It's not just the U.S. and its allies who are stepping in saying, uh-oh, don't do that. It's the whole world. And that would mean that people would not, in fact, have to maintain standing armies and the cost of it. Another thing, I think, for the military in the United States, we have gone to a voluntary draft. I'm sorry, a voluntary military. If we reinstituted a draft, and I just heard in the last 2 days, this plan has been, was written 2 years ago, but I just heard an ex-general talking, saying he thought that we should go back to the draft because it makes it a more even burden. If right now people volunteer, and who will volunteer? The people who do it because they don't have the money to be educated, they don't have other alternatives, and they join the military. And if we reinstituted the draft, then it falls on everybody. The likelihood is the same for everybody in the society. And to take that one step beyond, if the legislators who have to vote for whether we go to war or not, those who vote to go to war would have to vote to volunteer themselves, to volunteer their grown children, to volunteer their grown grandchildren. And I guarantee you, by that step alone, there would be such hesitancy. Who is going to say, who in his or her right mind would vote to say, well, I'll send my grandchild off with a high likelihood of being killed? I don't think so. There isn't any piece of land in our own countries or elsewhere that we want to give our own children's lives for. But the other thing that I think we need to do is to worldwide ban the lobbyists, because the lobbyists are the ones who put pressure on legislators to keep building all of these weapons of destruction. And that goes to still another issue. And remember, this is a plan that has to be adapted to different countries and different governments with their own processes and concerns. But term limits, if legislators, and let's just take the U.S. example for the moment, if people were elected to a Senate term that was one term, half again as long as what it is now, and they could not be reelected, then the lobbyists have no impact on them. Because the lobbyists are saying, I'm giving you money and I'm supporting you in your campaign, but if you don't do what my company or my organization wants, then we're not going to give you that money. Next time we'll give it to your competitor. So if you're not going to run again, you can really vote your conscience and think about all the discussion there is about what Obama will do in his second term, because he doesn't have to think about getting reelected. And another thing, in other countries, and it's so interesting to look at this through a transnational perspective. In the United States, we have campaigns for political office that go on now. It's nonstop. Somebody gets elected now. Obama gets elected in 2012 for the next 4 years. They are already talking about who will be running in 2016. Okay? But if, in fact, as in Ireland and Great Britain and other countries, political campaigns were limited to 6 weeks. In Ireland, from the time you decide to be a candidate and you sign the papers, you sign the papers 4 weeks before the election. That's it. And if they're publicly funded, if the government funds everybody, gives everybody the same amount for 4 weeks, it isn't for 24 or 48 months that they need money. You need much less money, waste much less. This national campaign that we just came through for Obama and Mitt Romney, they spent $6 billion. At least half of it is down the tubes. The money spent by the Republicans simply was money that went away and didn't accomplish what it set out to do. So if you think of these, and these are all interconnected, this is a web of activities. Business really needs, we've already talked about converting, bless you, the defense industry to nonprofit, and the Department of Peace being a for-profit agent, an agency that, or a department that funded for-profit, constructive, positive enterprises. There are different kinds of corporate structures, new kinds of corporate structures that are mentioned in the plan. The role of unions. Unions know how to negotiate, but unions in the U.S. have fallen into total disrepair. The number of people, the percent of people joining unions is diminishing all the time, and the corporations like that because it means the workers have very little voice. So unions have a lot of know-how in terms of negotiating and mediating. They should be the ones who are developing programs that can be used and taught in schools and in other venues to teach people how to negotiate, how to mediate, so you don't have to, come to blows, come to war over it. And mind you, I think peace is more than the absence of war. That's a big part of it, the absence of war, but it's not the whole thing. So the media have their role. The media tends to make war seem glorious, and everybody who goes to war is seen as a hero, no matter what the focus of the war is. So if the media really focus on the negativities of war, in the U.S. since George Bush Sr., we don't show the caskets of the dead military coming home, so we don't know. And it doesn't affect the country universally. It affects only certain parts of the country. And so it's a hidden cost. We don't see it. We don't bear the pain. We don't see the anguish. We're not touched by it in any way. Education. Education couldn't be more important. And I mean beginning in K through 12. Little kids have a big and overbearing or overriding sense of fairness. How often do little kids say, "That's not fair. Mama, you did that and you gave him more than you gave me." My kids were always telling me this wasn't fair, and they teased me because I used to joke with them and say, "Listen, kids, life isn't fair." So, get used to it. Life isn't fair. But seriously, to teach kids, building on their own innate sense of fairness, how to prevent bullying, how to mediate, how to negotiate. These are skills that little kids can use and develop, and that become part of what they do. My eldest daughter has been working on bullying for a very long time, anti-bullying. And one night I woke up in the middle of the night with an idea that she should promote the idea of T-shirts that say bullies are not cool. Because people, in school, kids think the bullies are cool, they're tough guys. But if you change the norms and you say bullies are not cool, then maybe bullies walk around thinking, maybe I shouldn't be quite so aggressive. Teach collaboration skills. Think about diversity training. It's interesting, little kids don't even notice when they're, in K through, say, 6th grade. They don't pay attention to other kids' skin color or eye shape or religion or any of those things. It's only when they get to be older, because they're taught that at a certain point by their parents, and they are divided from their peers along racial, ethnic, religious lines when they get to be at mostly of dating age. So little kids can learn all of these skills, and why not start with a peace curriculum that's designed for kids to understand. They understand fairness. They understand what peace would mean. And then at the university or the postgraduate level, what about a peace studies curriculum? At CGU, people, as you know, cannot graduate unless they have taken at least one course in what we call a transdisciplinary course. That means that it will be taught from the point of view of numerous disciplines. Why is that more important than peace? I mean, how could that be? And why shouldn't we? If everywhere, worldwide, in every university, people could not get a degree unless they took a course on peace, and we would hope there would be a curriculum so some people would be able to do more than take one course. Would that not make a difference in the way people thought about peace? And what about research on peace? And I won't later on, I talk about foundations and talk about what they should fund. Research and institutions that care about conflict resolution. For example, why shouldn't, if not every university, certain universities have conflict centers for the resolution or reconciliation of what we think of as intractable conflicts. You know, the Israeli-Palestinian thing is the paradigmatic case. And using the connective leadership model, what about bringing people, representatives of those conflicts together with the agreement that they will come to and continue to negotiate until they come to some resolution. And if they come to an impasse, they can take time, 72 hours off, but then they come back. And there are no media present, there are no photographers, there's no TV. And remember, Northern Ireland, that was a conflict that everyone said could never be settled. It's been resolved. It's uneasy, but if you have a long-standing conflict, it takes time for it to settle down into normalcy. And if you look back at many of these conflicts, even between the Palestinians and the Israelis, historically, they lived together in peace. And then things took historical turns that moved them in other directions. So I think the leadership groups and peace groups need to come together and talk. That leadership groups need to have a voice in international bodies like the UN, which is totally useless. I mean, it's totally politicized. It doesn't do what it was designed to do. We look the other way. We let one or two vetoes stop us from saving people who are being slaughtered by their own governments. These are all things that we can do something about. Religious institutions, and I think many of you know, I am not particularly religious, but I grew up in a very religious home and was for many years, but I appreciate and respect the importance of religion and religious leaders. And most of the wars that are going on right now have at their core a religious component. And of course, both sides are claiming that God is on their side. Not easy to do, but even though...
That's even worse, that they have a duty
yeah,
to God to
right,
fight wars.
absolutely. So when you bring God into the picture, or religion into the picture, you can fight to the death, because if you read the work of Ernest Becker, you'll see, he says, it's a life or death matter, because if you're right, I've got to be wrong, so I have to either persuade you that I'm right or kill you off so I don't have to deal with the sign that you're holding up. But this is where religious leadership comes in.
I just wanted to say something about that.
Yes.
And just as you pointed out, your very first slide, so many religions have at their core the goal and aim for peace. I mean, that's what so many are about. So.
And that's what all of those quotes
Exactly.
were at the very beginning of this presentation. They're all from religious sources. Every religion says, in one way or another, the peace is at the center of what they're doing. And yet people go around killing people, thousands of people, generations of people, in the name of their religion. Well, if the people who are doing this are that religious, they are going to pay attention to their religious leaders, right? And that's where religious leaders come into the picture. that they need to band together. And there are many who have done so. Right here in Pasadena, somebody by the name of George Regas, who is the rector of All Saints Episcopalian Church for many years, has gone around the world with a rabbi from the West Side, Leonard Bierman. And this, I think, is the most wonderful story. They met each other many years ago in the late 60s when they found themselves chained next to each other to the White House gate in protest against the Vietnam War. So they found each other that way just by happenstance. They each one had chained himself to the White House gate, and they were right next to each other. They began to talk, and they've been having that conversation ever since and trying to spread the word. At any rate, here are just a whole set of ideas about a noble vision, something that leaders can undertake, and which, if they did that, so many good things would fall into place. We would free up resources to deal with the war on poverty, with the war on hunger and homelessness and illness. Whereas now we are pouring our resources down the wrong tubes. And my 2-minute implementation program is simple. One, it's to use the social media to spread the word through the next generation. And Alette and I and another young person from the Netherlands have talked about how we can do that. How do we spread the word to the next generation so they're out in the street complaining and protesting every time we think about war? If enough people are out there protesting, they can, in fact, change the world. And as Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said, nothing of any importance ever happened without this isn't a direct quote, but this is what she means, the combined efforts of a group of impassioned people. And that is what will make things happen. And then I would like the Nobel Peace Committee to become the champion of this plan and call together an international congress. And I went back and read Alfred Nobel's will. Alfred Nobel was the inventor of dynamite. So I think it's perfect. Isn't that an absolutely wonderful thing? Here's this person who created dynamite, which has killed off millions of people. And what did he do? He was the one, because he came in contact with a woman whose name I don't remember.
Bertha von Suttner.
That's right.
Bertha von Suttner. That's
Von
the name of the
Suttner.
lady.
Will you, I know I can look it up myself, but just write the name and send it.
I will send you a link for a book about Bertha von Suttner, because she's a perfect example of the Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, exactly. And so think of the irony of this. Here is somebody who invented dynamite, and his name becomes associated with peace more than any other. So if we in fact can have champions from the Nobel Peace Committee, and his will calls for conferences convened by the Nobel Peace Committee. And my idea, in conformance with his wishes, would be to bring together all the countries of the world in a conference that signs on to the peace plan, amends it so that it applies to each country as it should. That in addition to which the peace plan they would set benchmarks. They would come back every other year and report. The government delegations would come back and report on their progress. In the intervening years, all the sectors of society, of all of these countries would come. So the higher ed sector from the U.S., from Japan, from Bulgaria, from Germany, from Africa, all over the world, would come and talk about what they had accomplished and had they met the guidelines. And I also have a minor project going on to symbolize this, and it's the Peace Tree Project, and it has to do with the sustainability aspect of this. That I want all the dead trees of the world to be taken and made into wood sculptures for peace. And I want at least one of these to stand on the grounds of the Nobel Peace Committee's headquarters, and to have these wooden sculptures everywhere, in every park, in front of every school, so that everywhere we look, we're reminded of peace. And the idea came to me because that big magnolia tree in my front yard is dying. And a colleague of mine, Katerina Pitt, said to me, you know, there's a great German sculptor who would be great at sculpting this tree. And she wasn't talking about the Peace Project. Then my cousin, who came to a Connective Leadership Institute seminar, Susan Israel, who's an architect, looked at it and said, you know, you should do that sculpture as a peace sculpture. So this began to take on a life of its own. So we have a sub-proposal for peace trees, for trees all over the world to be reclaimed and turned into peace sculptures everywhere. So that, you know, it's a visible reminder of the importance of sustainability. So these are just a few, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I know there was a memorial last year unveiled by the Queen of England, dedicated to the 55,573 airmen of Bomber Command who died during World War II. I have since a long time the idea to place another monument, more or less against that, for the victims of these 55,000, and many more, of course, all the victims in Britain and wherever they are as well.
Everywhere. I mean, we think,
They deserve the monument.
and you know, it's how we socialize people to think that killing, remember, people are brought up in virtually every religion and every society to think that killing is wrong. Then we send people into the military and tell them that killing is job one. And then we are surprised when people come back from war with terrible images of killing and things that they did to other people whom they didn't know, against whom they had no private vendetta. And they're tortured by it for the rest of their lives, because once you cross that line into from being someone of peace to being someone who has been a killer, you can't go back. There's no retracing your steps. So I think peace is a lifelong and generation-spanning effort. It isn't something that we'll do just by our generation in our lifetime. It has to be handed over carefully, each generation to the next generation, to preserve it in the way that it needs to be preserved in that generation as ideas and circumstances change. But I think this is not just a, you know, theoretical, idealistic plan. I think this can be a serious road to economic recovery for the world. If we thought about turning the entire world economy toward peace innovation, peace R&D, peace entrepreneurship, sustainability, if we thought about those issues, think of all the new businesses, think of all the new enterprises that would happen. And then when we're asked the question, leadership for what? The answer would be leadership for peace. And meeting that peace challenge is really a way of finding what various writers and philosophers have admonished us to do, which is to find the deeper meaning of life. That we find that deeper meaning of life by engaging in a noble enterprise that transcends our own narrow needs and yearnings. And I think the connective leadership, my hope is that it really will be a way of rethinking leadership, of thinking about authenticity, about being ethical leaders, about doing things that are not just for our own narrow needs, our kids' needs, our friends' needs, but for larger purposes, even beyond that. I'm not saying ignore your children's and your grandchildren's and your friends' needs, but I'm saying there has to be something beyond that. Because if all we think about is our own inner circle, whether it's our family or our friends, we don't make the world a better place for everybody. So I would like to leave you with that thought and thank you very much for all the effort and thought and ideas that you've contributed to my own journey on this quest for leadership for a stage 3 world. And so what I would like to do now is present you all with your certificates for recertification.